Why did Turkey just have an attempted military coup? Turkey is still reeling from the impact of the military, attempting to seize power from the government, something which seems to happen on a surprisingly regular basis. Which leads us to wonder, why does Turkey have this rather peculiar history of military coups? Well, let's try applying a little less common sense. Now, fair warning, I will be saying lots of foreign words that I don't actually know how to pronounce. Instead, I'll be relying on a traditional British linguistic technique that involves me saying them however I want and then assuming that I'm right and you're wrong because I'm British and we invented words. So, let's start with a little bit of history. The current Turkish state was born in 1923 and replaced what was called then the sick old man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, or the Ottoman Sultanate, as it was at birth, was an Islamic state with a history stretching back to the latter part of the 13th century. It had a rather unique blend of both a religious and a non-religious legal system. It also introduced, or perhaps was forced to introduce through external influence, a level of equality between Muslims and non-Muslims that was quite progressive for the time. It wasn't always successful at the regional level, but the principle was there. Following the First World War, Constantinople was occupied by the Allies and the empire was dissected and partitioned. The Turks responded by launching their own war for independence. They succeeded, and the result was a new Turkish state, built under the guidance of Mustafa Ataturk. Ataturk was remarkably progressive for his time, apart from a few dalliances with genocide. But he saw how divisive and how difficult it was to integrate religion and politics. So he came up with a plan. The constitution for the new Turkish state made it a fundamental requirement that the government remained secular, or non-religious. He saw this as the only way to ensure that all the people of Turkey would receive fair and equal treatment. But how do you enforce this in a country which is by far majority Muslim? How do you maintain a purely secular state? And the answer lies with the military. The Turkish military have taken on the mantle of protectors of the secular nature of government, and they've intervened on multiple occasions when they fear that nature has been compromised. They've deposed 4 incumbent leaders since the 1960s. 3.5 maybe, and not always for religious reasons admittedly, but they've always stated their intent to maintain Ataturk's original vision for the Turkish state. It's a duty they actually take pretty seriously. So, what triggered the recent events? Well, the current Turkish president is a gentleman called Recep Erdogan, who is a distinctly pro-Islamic politician. In fact, he was formerly a member of the ruling pro-Islamic Welfare Party that had been deposed and banned by the military in 1997. For some time now, Erdogan has been seeking to weaken the military and strengthen his own position through a series of purges that have seen hundreds of military officers and journalists and opposition lawmakers arrested, imprisoned and replaced with Erdogan loyalists. A very recent example of this is known as the Palace Coup of 2016 against the sitting Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, who had been resisting Erdogan's policies as president. A political coup rather than a military coup, Erdogan essentially outmanoeuvred his Prime Minister, leading to his resignation and replacement by one of Erdogan's supporters, Binali Yildirim, in May 2016. But why would the military choose now to act? And there's actually 2 very interesting points to consider here, and the first relates to the arrests that immediately followed the failed military action. Erdogan had a lot of people arrested, and I mean a lot of people arrested, and many of them weren't actually military officials at all. At the time of writing, the numbers suggested around 2,745 judges had been dismissed and or arrested, with arrest warrants issued for a further 200-ish very senior Turkish judges sitting at the highest levels of the judiciary. Now, by the time this video gets to the world, those numbers may well have increased, and by the time you watch it, they may well have increased again. That's a really big list. It's also not the kind of list that you draw up overnight. And it also really begs the question, why arrest all the judges for a military coup? Well, given the short time scale and given Erdogan's history for rounding up potential opposition, it really does suggest that the list was actually sitting there, waiting to be used. The second quite interesting point is that the whole thing really seemed to be a little bit, rubbish, really. The military have done this before, they know what they're doing, but the whole thing really fell apart quite quickly. There weren't many tanks, there weren't many troops, and even the troops that they did have seemed to surrender to unarmed mobs without resisting. Taking all these things together, we start to find two particular theories gaining momentum. The first theory is that the pre-prepared list of people to arrest indicates that Erdogan was preparing to move, and the military realised they couldn't delay any longer. They had no more time to prepare, they had to move first, and so they just went with whatever resources were available. The second theory is that Erdogan supporters within the military were responsible for the military action, knowing that it would fail miserably, but create an opportunity for Erdogan to consolidate power, which he immediately did with his pre-prepared list. This is already being heralded as Erdogan's Reichstag fire, sharing some rather chilling resemblances to one of Hitler's most infamous power grabs. So, which of these two theories is correct? Why did Turkey just have an attempted military coup? The answer is, I don't know. I might suspect, but I don't actually know. Instead, I'll pose what I think is actually a much more interesting question for you. Was the coup successful? I would say the answer is yes. But wait a second, didn't the military fail? Yes, it failed, but what we recently witnessed in the Turkish capital may not actually have been the coup. What if it was actually the last stand of the military in response to attacks on the constitution, the last desperate gasp of the secular dream? What if the true coup here is the one that Erdogan has been prosecuting since he came into power? Over that time he has chipped and chipped away at the military, the judiciary, and all of the opposition. Now he has successfully neutered the last two institutions that could possibly protect and maintain the integrity of Ataturk's Turkey, the military and the courts. And that, in a nutshell, is the less common sense view of the recent events in Turkey. If you liked this video, click like. If you didn't like it, click dislike. Just generally sort of click something somewhere on the screen. And most importantly, don't forget to click subscribe if you agree, like me, that we all need a little less common sense in our lives.